It is the Practical Prayer Podcast on New Thought Media Network with Bill over here and Carol over there. And it's an auspicious day. An auspicious day because in addition to being a week into the Mercury retrograde, which has nothing to do with New Thought, today is also a solar eclipse. So, Carol, it looked for a second like you do not, you're not read in on Mercury retrograding.
Um, yeah, yeah. I was introduced. First of all, I need to put it on my calendar. I usually don't. So,
It's through
like
the
2 or 3
25th of
days into
April.
it, when I'm going completely nuts because some stuff is not working, that should easily be working. It dawns on me. It's the retrograde. So I go to Google, get the dates, and say, duh, like you're in the middle of this thing. So
Yep.
guess what? I'm on it now. I've put it on my calendar through the end of this year and the first quarter of next year, not to be caught
Good.
again.
Oh yeah, I
Okay?
got surprised by it this time.
Yeah.
That's just me. So, but as I mentioned, that's not the big news for today. And by the way, I'm going to start by saying hello to everybody who's joining us on New Thought Media Network. It is wonderful to have you with us. And we're going to record an episode of the Practical Prayer Podcast in a couple of minutes. And in the meantime, what you can do is you can put a comment into your social media chat and or comments, and we can respond to that, whether it's a prayer request, a question, a suggestion, an observation, or some whatever. You can put that in there. If you are watching on the recordings, you could go to the website at bethelight.com, be-the-light.com, and there's a section for the Practical Prayer Podcast there, and there is a similar comment button on the website so that you can communicate with us out of band, as they say. And what we would like to be able to do is engage in a way that's going to be meaningful and lift folks up. So with that said, this is somewhat interactive, and we're going to stop being interactive when we start recording the episode in a couple of minutes. But yeah, today is the last solar eclipse in North America for quite some time, and actually the last one on Earth for quite some time. And we're going to talk about that in the episode because it's either a big deal or it's not, and we're going to figure it out. Should we
I
explain
think it's
Mercury
a pretty big
retrograde?
deal.
Well, it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Explain it, and then because a lot of people don't understand it or don't believe it, you don't have to. It's still working.
Well, yeah. So basically, Mercury retrograde, um, all of the planets in our solar system orbit around the sun. And because we're on planet Earth and we're orbiting around the sun, basically the platform from which we're looking at the other planets is moving. And because we're moving at a different speed than the other planets, they move in the sky in relation to our platform here on Earth. For the planets that are inside the orbit of Earth, it's possible as they're going around the sun faster than we are, at some point it looks like they're going backwards. And it's not because they're actually going backwards. They're continuing to go in a circle, but we're overtaking them. In our orbit, we're going faster. The angular motion is different, so it looks like they're going backwards. So most planets just go around and around like this. And retrograde goes around, looks like it's going this way, and it stops a little bit, does a little jiggle, and it continues around. Fascinating. That's a fascinating little data point. Doesn't mean anything. Except for the correlation. It turns out that when Mercury is in retrograde, communications get screwed up. It's the cell phone doesn't work, and that happened to me today. My cell phone, the radio on my cell phone just wasn't working. It was on SOS only. It's the first time it's done that in a month or two. And people have said, I did a wedding for some brides a couple, like 6 months ago, and they suddenly came out of the woodwork saying, we haven't gotten our paperwork. And I said, oh, well, something happened with the courthouse. Contact the courthouse. They said, you owe us the paperwork. And I said, I don't have the paperwork. I'm not allowed to. This is Pennsylvania. You have to get it from the court. They said, we expect it from you. Send us our paperwork. It's like, hello, I don't have your paperwork. You need to contact the court. They said, we don't even know if we're married. It's like, here's a screenshot from the county website showing that you're married and that they mailed you your thing in October. So can you please just contact them? Hello, shouting down a well. So it's Mercury retrograde. And we all have stories
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. I
You
got
had
one.
one today. You have a neighbor who
I
is loves to communicate and knows that you record this program every Monday
mm-hmm.
and that you're not available on Monday. And what does she do on Monday, right before the recording?
Send me a text or a call or call, text, voicemail. So it seems urgent. But how many episodes are we in?
Number
100
148
and
today.
that seems to be enough for somebody to remember.
Yeah, we're coming up on 3 years of this, so it's possible that said neighbor could remember. But anyway, that's Mercury retrograde. And I mentioned that magical piece, which is causation or correlation. And that's a really interesting thing in science because it is very easy to observe things that are going on and say, the, the weather is getting warmer and the sun is coming up earlier. So when the weather gets warm, it makes the sun come up earlier. It's like no, no. Basically, based on orbital mechanics, the sun comes up earlier. That makes it warmer, and we know that. But it's possible to look at it and just understand we have this data point and that data point, and they correlate with each other, even though it's not necessary that one of them causes the other, or the one that we think is doing the causing is actually doing it. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the magic of observation, is we can be so wrong in our conclusions, even though we're so accurate in our observations.
Yeah. Lots of times thinking it out.
Lots of times.
Yeah.
So you want to get into the
That's
episode
why a lot
before?
of times, oh no,
Go
I
ahead.
was just going to say that a lot of times that's why I always say, start out with me. It's probably me. So let me look at the facts of what's going on here because, I've
Yep.
been wrong a
Don
lot.
Don Miguel Ruiz said one of his agreements is don't make assumptions. And
That's
if I
right.
make the assumption that I know what's happening, I'm probably wrong. And and then what happens next? It's time for fun. Let's do a podcast episode.
A practical prayer is a prayer that works.
These discussions between Reverend Bill Marchiony and Carol Lawrence dive into the details of how it works and how to work it.
Reverend Bill is a New Thought minister and the author of Practical Prayer for Real Results.
Your new life begins with a new thought.
Carol Lawrence is on a spiritual quest, finding the New Thought teaching after decades on the pulpit in 3 different traditional denominations.
I've got some questions.
Together, they're exploring the philosophy and activities that come together from many of the world's religions to create the practical spirituality that is New Thought.
Welcome to the Practical Prayer Podcast. I'm Carol here with Reverend Dr. Bill Marchiony. Hi.
Hello there. And so we are recording this episode of the podcast on the day of the solar eclipse. And if you are watching or listening to this podcast in its later renditions, you might vaguely remember that there's a solar eclipse in April of 2024 in North America, or you may not remember that, or you may not care about that. But the reason that we're going to talk about it is because that's kind of the way New Thought works. Things happen, and we have an engagement, and interaction, and understanding of them, and what it means to us actually has some meaning.
Yeah. So, the eclipse, I remember when I was real little, I don't know, like really, really in elementary school, I think we had one like this.
Hmm.
And we weren't supposed to look at the sun, and they were creating all kind of little things for you to use to look at the sun, and it was, I don't remember, it was cones and all kind of stuff, and
Thing made out of a couple of cardboard boxes that you put your head into.
yeah, this stuff. And I remember being so confused by trying to get it done and the threat of going blind if you don't if you don't get it right. I remember thinking like, listen, this is not worth it because I don't have, good eyesight to begin with. I'm nearsighted. So I thought, I don't see good on a on the best day. I'm not messing with this. I remember being a little kid thinking that. And so now today, I'm thinking, I never saw an eclipse except for a picture, and that's all it will ever be.
Well,
It depends on
okay.
how you look at these, the extent that you'll go to be able to see it.
That's actually a wonderful metaphor for the way that we engage in the world because it is possible for somebody's eyesight to be damaged by a solar eclipse. And then there's the voodoo that surrounds that, which is like, oh, if I go outside during a solar eclipse, my vision is going to be damaged. So I should stay indoors. I should hide from it. I should watch it on television. I should make sure that I'm nowhere near the solar eclipse light because there's something evil or malevolent about it. And that's not true.
You know what? I didn't know this, but I was reading about it, and it was like a lot of witchcraft, the negative kind of witchcraft, not the good stuff, but the
Hmm.
negative kind was all wrapped up in it. And I thought, I'm not, I can't say whether it's right or wrong because people believe whatever they want, but things you kind of make it be what you want it to be. It seems, like
Yep.
that. Yeah, notice how slow I was about saying that because
Yeah. I remember the same solar eclipse you're talking about when I was a kid. And it was undoubtedly the same one because you were in Philadelphia and I was in North Jersey. And so that's the similar one that's happening. And we built the same contraption in our house so that we could look through the projected image. And it was interesting because you had to make sure that your head wasn't in the way of the picture of the sun. And the mailman came by during the eclipse, and my dad met him outside and says, "You're not looking at the eclipse, are you?" And the mailman said, "No, that's the reason I'm wearing glasses is because I did that when I was a kid." So this has been going on for a while.
long time,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, and I'm going to take off the religious science hat and put on the science hat, and here's why. Here's how the solar eclipse can hurt somebody's eyes. So when the eclipse happens, it's basically the shadow of the moon coming. That's what makes it dark. So the moon is coming between the sun and the earth. Now, normally we don't look at the sun, and we certainly don't stare at the sun because it is what?
Too bright.
It's right. It's too bright to look at. It will hurt our eyes, and it actually hurts to try and look at it, so we don't. But during a solar eclipse, it's fascinating. So we are intrigued by that. We want to see what's going on. So we tend to look at the sun and say, oh, what is that? And then it turns out that the amount of light that's coming off the sun is much less than it usually is. So it is possible to look at it. So our usual squint, look away reaction goes away. But not all of the sunlight gets blocked. There's usually that little diamond ring thing that's there. That's as bright as the sun ever is. And the way that our eyes work is the light comes down and it gets focused by our cornea, which is the lens, and it lands somewhere on our retina. And during an eclipse, most of our retina is not getting any light, but that one little tiny part that is, it's still looking straight at the sun. So
Yeah.
that's actually why it's bad to look straight at the sun during an eclipse or any time. It's just nobody thinks of doing it other times.
That just makes so perfect sense. Now, as many times or as often as I remember the eclipse story and the experience, nobody ever explained it. I don't remember anybody explaining it like that. It's just you don't look at it.
Don't
And
look
like
at it. It's
common
dangerous.
sense,
It's scary. Bad voodoo.
yeah, the voodoo part. And I mean, you don't know science, but common sense tells you there's still a little sunlight coming through. Maybe shouldn't mess with it and just leave it alone. But without a really good scientific explanation, you can just go all over the place with this and anything else, really.
Hmm.
And I'm not no poo-poo on interpretations and all of that business, but I do kind of like the scientific explanation for a lot of things. I kind of feel, you know, comfortable with that.
Well,
Although from the side of the street I come from, yeah, you don't have
this,
science and religion at the same table trying to talk. But it
well,
makes
you
sense
have
to
them
me.
both working together, and they're just fine until there's a disagreement. In which
Well,
case,
yeah,
it becomes blasphemy.
but the conversation doesn't get very far before you get a disagreement. I don't know who you've been talking to, but I'll
You
tell
remember
you,
the good
I
old
know.
days when the Earth was flat and then when it was round, it was the center of the universe. Ah, the good old days.
Yeah.
Why can't we have those again?
I don't remember when they call them flat earthers now. That I don't know if that's a new term, but I remember when they talked about it, and I thought, could people have really believed that? Because it just doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense.
There's
But
still people who believe that.
well, that's the shocker, because I'm thinking that doesn't make any sense. But then I realized, or was told later in reading, that there are people who believe that, and I suppose they can explain it their side as well as others, you know, can explain it. I don't know.
You could take the non-believers, up to the International Space Station and have them orbit the Earth in 90 minutes, and they still wouldn't believe it. And it has nothing to do with observation. It has nothing to do with the facts. It has to do with belief. Belief is really strong. Belief is really powerful.
Yeah.
I heard a great explanation of how it's impossible that the Earth is flat. And that is because the Earth is inhabited with cats. And if the Earth were actually flat, by now the cats would have pushed everything off the edge.
Okay.
And that's as likely as anything else.
You know what? Everybody knows I hang out at the ocean every chance I get.
Yep.
And my husband was just saying one time, he said, we live on the edge of the earth. And it was just funny to hear him say that because he is a scientist. Like, that's his background and all of that. And I looked at him and I understood what he was saying. From where we're standing, you certainly can feel like you're on the edge of the earth. And you couple that with talking to God at the same time, from being on the edge of the earth, hey, you can start a whole new religion on that if you want to. So
yeah.
it depends on what you believe, really.
And that's probably the sort of religion that would be relatively easy to get people into, because it all happens at the beach. The edge of the earth that your husband is talking about. Yeah, well, I mean, it's the edge of the ocean, the edge of the earth. That's where the two of them meet. And there's a little dance they do back and forth that we call waves and tides. But it's always pretty much at the same place. And so, yeah, I love his explanation. Spent a fair amount of time as a scuba diver. And so the edge of the earth stretches out a little bit farther for scuba divers than it does for everybody else, because we can go underneath the ocean part, and there's still interesting stuff to do there.
Your imagination can just completely run crazy. For example, did you feel the earthquake the other day that we had?
My daughter gets angry when people ask that question. It was an earthquake. What do you mean, did you feel it? And the fact of the matter is, I did not feel it. I was in the basement grooming the dog with like the vibrating clipper in my hand, and the washing machine was going thugga 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 thugga, making everything shake anyway, and there was a dehumidifier going, so everything was kind of in motion anyway. And my wife runs downstairs, everything is shaking, and I said, what do you mean? She said, come up here, everything's shaking, the glasses are making this tinkling noise. So I get enough stuff taken care of that the dog is not going to freak out and jump off the grooming table, and I walk upstairs, and of course it's over, and so I didn't feel a thing. So, no, I didn't. And it's the second one that I was in that I didn't feel. I was in an elevator the previous time, and it just felt like a bumpy elevator ride, and it turns out the earthquake happened while we were in the elevator at an IKEA.
Yeah. Well, this one, okay, so I'm going to give you and everybody a chance to laugh, right? I'm
Okay.
feeling the quake, and I'm dead into my work, and I was recording something, and I felt it, and I thought, that truck is passing. But then that's what happens when you live in Philly. The trucks pass, the windows vibrate. I thought, you don't live in Philly. What is this? And I thought, well, let me just change positions, as though that was going to address the problem. And I kept feeling it, and I just got right back into my work until I noticed the computer screen was vibrating. And I thought, maybe something's going on here. But by the time I figured it out, it was over. Forgot completely about it until maybe an hour or so later. I thought, why don't you go check on Don, see if he's okay? Don's my husband, everybody.
An
So
hour.
I
Snap
stood,
into action.
I, sc- I scooped down there to see how he's doing, just like you. He said he didn't feel anything. He didn't know a thing about it. Nothing. In fact, he didn't ask when, no questions. He just kept doing what he was doing.
Nope.
Go figure,
Everybody getting text messages. Did you feel that? And the interesting observation that you had that you try moving to see if it goes away, and that can work, but you would have had to move to like Toledo, where they didn't feel it. And that's another example of something that happens, and then we have an interaction with what happens, and we can ascribe meaning to the interaction, whether the original thing has something to do with it or not.
Exactly. And you talked about beliefs, and you can almost see how different beliefs start. Because I wrote about the earthquake, of course, afterwards. And the idea is that it depends on where you were and what you were thinking. Because I talked to a lot of people, people checking in and making sure everybody was okay. Some people were laughing. Some people were scared to death. And I'm thinking, I'm not inclined to be scared. And I thought, But I had to speak to each person where they were.
Right.
So it was so different speaking to a person who was afraid as opposed to who was being a jokester about it.
Or your husband who didn't feel it at
Yeah,
all.
or who didn't know a thing. So it might be not a whole lot of space in between times that I spoke to people. And when I got finished, I thought it's all about what you believe when something happens. That belief kicks in, and that's your truth. But that's not the truth, and
Well, we're
Oh,
heading
it's
into the
another story.
metaphysics of this now, aren't we?
Yeah, but how do you not get there? Because
Well, that's what there is. So I think it's great to get there. Let's take a break, and then we will talk about the meaning of a solar eclipse or an earthquake, and then what the meaning means.
okay.
Get inspiration in an instant. God calls are the gentle and uplifting moment of truth to help you remember that the bright light of God's love is shining right now as you
It's your God Call with Reverend Bill.
start your 2-week free trial today, and you'll get a phone call 4 times a week from Reverend Bill with an uplifting half-minute message filled with insight, wisdom, story, and fun.
Let your light shine.
You can answer the call to listen to it live or let it go to voicemail so you can hear it later. After the free trial, your subscription is just $5.95 a month. The details are at godcall.org. God calls are disruptive, intentionally.
Whenever you write something, put on a gold star.
They take you away from your routine to remind you about the truth of who you really are. They come at random times between 8:15 a.m. and 6 p.m., so you won't be expecting them. And somehow, the message is exactly what you need to hear at the time.
Magic is loose in the world.
It's a moment of motivation in the middle of your day. Find out more and start your 2-week free trial now at godcall.org.
Welcome back to the Practical Prayer Podcast. I'm Carol here with Reverend Dr. Bill Marchiony.
We're talking about earthquakes and solar eclipses and what they mean and what they don't mean. Because these things happen. This is the way of the universe. Because we are independent and conscious beings, we are aware of our circumstances. We have a memory, so we know what's happened previously. And we have our intellectual faculties, so we can put the pieces together and kind of project what may be happening in the future. We can get fooled. We can, that is such fertile ground for being surprised by things. So recently, an earthquake, and today we're going to be having a solar eclipse. And it's possible to attach meaning to those that goes well beyond what's actually going on. And I'm remembering the Mark Twain novel, Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. So there's this guy in 1912, a mechanic, who gets bonked on the head or something, and he winds up back in King Arthur's Court, and they figure that he's a wizard, so they're going to burn him at the stake or whatever. And he happens to remember that the date that they're doing that is the day that there's going to be a solar eclipse. So he uses the knowledge that there's going to be a solar eclipse to tell the court, you better not do anything to me or I'll take the sun away. And they go, you can't do that. And he says, give me 8 minutes. And they wait and it gets dark. And it's like, uh-oh, make the sun come back. And he knows how long the eclipse is going to last. He says, no, you're going to sit here in the dark for a while. You're just going to have to wait. And they did, and they were all kind of panicky because they thought that what was going on is that this wizard was taking the sunlight away, and in fact it was just somebody who knew something. And he said, okay, behave yourselves and I'll let the sun come back. And of course the shadow of the moon went back past and the light came back, and everybody was completely relieved that the wizard was not using his wizardly power to destroy them. The only wizardly power he had was the knowledge that there was going to be an eclipse that day.
Right.
Okay, so with that in mind, what does an eclipse mean? Well, if you know it's coming and nobody else does, it means that you have a wonderful opportunity to maneuver the circumstances. And if everybody else knows that it's going to be happening and you don't, then there's a possibility of getting surprised or hoodwinked. An earthquake is different. Nobody knows that it's coming. But then you get into why. Oh, it happened because of the evil people who were living there. It happened because of this political party or that political party. It happened because it's this far from Donald Trump's golf course or that far from where they're doing fracking in northeastern Pennsylvania. You can ascribe any reasons that you want to it and use that to bolster your opinion, to make your side righter. And what's actually going on is the tectonic plates in the earth are shifting. For whatever reason they're shifting. They do and they stop. And the shadow of the moon happens to cross the earth in a particular place and then it passes like all shadows do. And what it means is there was an eclipse. That's it.
Now, okay, see, this is awful. No, it's not. That's why I didn't have such a welcome seat at the table on the other side of the street. Because I listen, I was an only child for like 6 years. So there was nothing for me to do but read. That's just it. And my parents were really, because listen, back there in those days you had 3, 6, and 10. 12 didn't come and do, channels. So it was nothing to do but read. And I was never allowed to read comic books. So I read a lot of different stuff that, kids probably didn't read. So it's really difficult for me to have accepted a lot of things that were shoved at me because there's a logical explanation for things. And I'm not poo-pooing the idea that you can put spiritual interpretations and other kinds of interpretations on things, but know that's what you're doing.
Right.
Make an analogy as opposed to a belief. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
We can explain it looking at this natural thing. We can give meaning to it as though it were an example or an analogy of something, as opposed to saying, well, this is the reason it happened because it's near Donald Trump's whatever. Because, if you do that, the earth would never stop shaking because
Right.
he's not the only person that people don't feel favorably about. So then what's going to happen? He's just the one that's most popular right now that people hate, but, he's...
And that changes. And
Yeah.
that changes routinely. A friend of mine has actually some expertise in total eclipses. And I think he's been in 5 total eclipses. He's actually arranged to be in the path of totality 5 times previously. And it's one of those things where if you haven't been in a total eclipse, and I've been in a partial eclipse several times, but I haven't been in a total eclipse. And the people who have been in a total eclipse say it's different. And I can say, well, what makes it different? And they can explain it and they can use words and they can describe it. But what they're describing is the feeling that they have when something happens that's out of the ordinary. And as much as I understand that, until I do it, I won't really know what they're talking about until I have that same visceral feeling myself. What makes this different? What's, you know, it's not like it's dark, nighttime dark. It's eerie dark in the middle of the day, and what does this mean? And it's a personal experience of a global astronomical phenomenon.
Mm-hmm. And that's where, to me, science gets respect. And maybe that's a safe way to put it. And if from the other side of the street, I'll say, "Oh, listen, I just respect the science. We don't know everything, but what we do know, we should know and not try to unknow it and explore, explore the next thing. You just can't make things into something, and I respectfully say this, wooey, if it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I tend to be a wooey person too, by the way, but if you can explain it away, you can't. It's no
Yeah.
magic.
There's a huge amount of concern about global warming and climate change. And, whether the global warming is man-made or it's not, whether it's something that needs to be resolved by human beings, or if it doesn't, if the problems are going to continue and, does it mean this or that or the other thing? And people are taking sides, and a lot of people who are taking sides are the ones who are making a lot of money by messing up the planet, and they want to keep being able to make the money, and they think that the planet will take care of itself. And that's where the disagreements come from. And the interesting part is, and some scientists did this decades ago. The question is, do you believe that mankind is taking more resources out of the Earth's crust than are being replaced? And everybody says yes. So the discussion is about, what does that mean? What are the implications? And how long is that going to last? And it's a different conversation. It's because everybody believes that. Everybody believes that. There was a story of when the railroad companies were faced with the automobile. It's like, uh-oh. And some of them wanted to fight the automobile. And there's going to be trucks that are available, and eventually the interstate system, and then there's going to be airplanes. And the railroad companies that did really well are the ones that visioned themselves as transportation companies instead of just as railroads. Because when you put yourself into the box, if I'm a railroad company, then I got to fight everything that's not the railroad. If I make buggy whips, then the horseless carriage is a threat to my security. And if I say, I'm going to make steering wheel covers instead, or automotive upholstery, it's an opportunity to diversify, get into something different, and continue sharing the gifts and the talents that we have, but to do it in a different direction. There is sometimes such a hesitation for an energy company to think of itself as an oil and gas company instead of an energy company. I mean, there are other ways to make energy, and by the way, they all still have a lot to do with taking resources out of the planet and using them for something. They're just not burning them. A little more clever to make solar panels or lithium-ion batteries.
And okay, that discussion comes up in a lot of ways. It's AI now. It's the same thing. And, for a hot minute, I got a little angst about the AI thing because, look, I'm a writer. And now you're telling me that, whatever. But then I thought about all of the evolution of humankind and productivity and all of that. Those things happen periodically. There's going to be something new. That just means that we're progressive. We're moving forward. And this that I thought for a second was threatening me is not threatening me at all. It's a tool that will be useful to a lot of other people who need it. And it's like the computer. That was the devil when it first came. Nothing's going to happen. You're going to go to the devil and it's going to put I won't go into it. But now we can't even imagine life without those little tiny computers called a telephone.
Yeah,
So
the screens that we
looked
get to stare at and waste our life on.
Oh, yeah. And so I looked at AI the same way. It's a mark of progression. It's just a movement, and you can. It takes nothing from me. In fact, helps me think a little better sometimes. Actually, when I stop
Hmm.
feeling threatened. So I agree with you. I'm really resonating with you about seeing something from a positive lens. How can I use this? Because everything is God. I look at AI as a gift. Not only has it been here forever and we just didn't think of it that way, it's just been given stepping forward with a title that's unfamiliar to us, but everything is God. It's a gift that God has given us, an expression of God's intellect. And don't get me started on that. When I thought about that, I said, whoa, this is really good. And that's what made me look at it even more. To see, well, listen, how can I use God in my stuff a little better? Maybe this is a gift to me.
Hmm.
So,
And there's definitely
yeah.
something there. And we're starting to talk about that on Sunday mornings in our celebration. There are a couple of observations that I have about AI, and the first one is the big thing in AI now is the large language models, where they take lots and lots of data and they feed it into these things and let it cross tabulate everything and figure stuff out based on other things that have happened. And there are two areas that particularly have me concerned. Now, actually, there are three. One of them is that the people who own the intellectual material that's getting consumed by these large language models, like the New York Times, because they have some authoritative stuff to say, and encyclopedias and dictionaries that just get read into these things and used. They say, "Oh, wait a second, that's copyrighted," and it's not that you can't use it. It's just that, like, we put a lot of effort into making that. So when are we going to get something out of it? When are we going to get credit for it? And that's been just dismissed up until now. The other thing is, because they need a lot of data, there's this idea amongst the AI companies that they can use the data that the AI systems have generated as data to feed into the AI systems. Wait a second, you're going to connect your own output to your own input and just let it run itself down a rabbit hole? And the third one is, and as I keep hearing promos for this on companies that are selling their AI technology to companies, hallucination free. Now, a hallucination is basically what happens when AI gets an idea and then runs with it. And it's something that never had anything to do with truth, but because there's enough other stuff in its database that it convinces itself that it's a good idea, and then that becomes the output that it has. And oh, by the way, if you're training the AI system on its own output, then the hallucinations are just going to get more and more vivid. So all of that stuff comes together so that I, on the one hand, completely agree with you that AI is just another tool, that's another way that this is going to unfold. And if we tap the brakes a little bit and say, what are we actually doing here? Then instead of insisting that the solar eclipse is God's punishment for us, and it's the way of being reminded that all of the good can be taken away from us, and instead say, no, it's just a solar eclipse, it's going to pass. We're in a better position.
Well, first of all, you are you're asking a lot of human beings.
That's
Stop,
me.
slow down, and think. You're asking a whole lot. And that's a whole nother, podcast. And the reason why I would say it's a whole nother podcast because it can sound a little bit offensive. And I really am not trying to do that. But things move so quickly and people are demanding things that move quickly. We are accustomed to that. We're not
Hmm.
accustomed to slowing down, thinking about the implications of this, that, and the other thing. Uh, it will flush itself out, not to say that it's not something to be concerned about, but you are so miles ahead of anybody else being concerned about that. And I'm hearing people, listen, I'm hearing people talk about the use of it to me in a way that lacks integrity
Hmm.
and all the rest of that. And I'm thinking, what is wrong with you? Don't you? People don't, they don't think, authenticity doesn't matter. It's how you can use it. This is just a really quick story. I was looking at one of the YouTube things. Or, everybody wants to teach you how to be a millionaire in about 20 minutes. And this one guy uh, produced 30 books. He's an author of 30 books. And I'm thinking, first of all, you ain't been on the planet long enough to have written 30 books. And, sir, I can see there's no genius here we're talking to. And so people are just, eating this up. And I'm thinking, nobody's thinking. But he's smart enough to know that people don't think. And they can just, so, what are you going to do? You just have to wait until it just flushes itself out because, just a moment's thought would tell you that this person is not producing 30 books. And then if you look at the books, even on camera, they don't look like they've been properly edited. So, yeah.
I spent a fair amount of time in my career doing consulting work. And there's a tongue-in-cheek comment that consultants had, which is, if you're not going to be part of the solution, there's good money to be made by prolonging the problem. Let's take a break and then
I'm going to look at that when we get finished.
Let's take a break and we'll do a prayer about solar eclipses, earthquakes, and artificial intelligence.
Learn to put practical prayer to work in your life. The steps are simple to learn and let you begin to get real results to create the life of your dreams immediately. Reverend Bill Marchiony's widely acclaimed book, Practical Prayer for Real Results, gives you a clear summary of the new thought principles behind practical prayer and the series of easy-to-understand steps found in the most effective prayers from religions and spiritual practices all over the world and throughout history. Practical prayer is not a replacement for your religion or practice. It's a technique to make the work you do in consciousness even more effective. The book includes 40 prayers on various topics that you can adapt as needed and use as your own. Practical Prayer for Real Results is available in paperback, Kindle, and audiobook on Amazon or at b-the-light.com. That's b-the-light.com.
Welcome back to the Practical Prayer Podcast. I'm Carol, here with Reverend Dr. Bill Marchiony. I don't know
Right
what we
before
were
the
talking
break,
about.
I gave you the tongue-in-cheek saying that we had in the consulting business. And it was actually not something that we believed in. It's just one of those things that goes around because sometimes it's a little too close to home. And that was, if you're not going to be part of the solution, there's good money to be made prolonging the problem. And if you look at it, that's so true. That's so true. If I can stand here saying, this is a problem, this is an emergency, this is something that has to be dealt with immediately, then I get a lot of attention. Then I get a lot of attention, and I can turn that attention into whatever the coin of the realm happens to be. If it's Facebook followers or YouTube subscribers or advertising sales or people sitting with me for a session to read their tea leaves or whatever it is. If I can frighten somebody enough to think that they need to snap into action by buying whatever it is that I'm selling, then that's the game. And the important part is that doesn't need to be the game. We can do a different game. When there is a solar eclipse, that means something. But it doesn't mean that we're being punished with darkness in the middle of the day. What it means is the Earth and the Sun and the Moon are moving in such a way that the Moon is getting between the Earth and the Sun, and there's a shadow. And that's what we experience as an eclipse. When an earthquake happens, it's because we are living in the city of the damned, and it's being shaken by the infinite power that creates everything. Or the tectonic plates are slipping and we feel it as an earthquake. And sometimes there's a lot of destruction, and sometimes there's just big stories and people saying, did you hear that? Did you feel that? Same thing with artificial intelligence. In and of itself, it's neither good nor bad. However, the stories that we tell about it and the way that we engage with it can be. So the important part in all of this, the big umbrella, the overriding picture, what we can take into prayer, is to invite each of these to be an unfolding of good. Highest and best unfolding with love and ease for everyone who's involved. And it's showing up as artificial intelligence. It's showing up as an experience of a solar eclipse, giving us an opportunity to become more introspective, to learn something either about ourselves or about our world that we didn't know before. To have an earthquake remind us of what's important. And perhaps as a suggestion that when we're building something, to don't just think about having the thing standing there on a nice sunny day. Maybe let's consider what's going to happen if there's a storm. What's going to happen if there's an earthquake? What happens if there's a fill in the blank? So that we are being good stewards of the resources that we have and supporting that experience that we're desiring, instead of just assuming that it's going to be there. So let's pray by turning our attention away from the world around us. Have your own little personal eclipse by letting your eyes close or go to a soft focus. And look at that. Suddenly the light goes away. It's still there, but we're not aware of it. But we can be more fully aware of that divine power and presence that is there, that's always there, that's showing up in the bright light, that's showing up in the shadows and the darkness, that's showing up in every activity and every moment. There is only that love. There is only that one infinite power and presence, that one divine substance, that infinite creative power is sharing and revealing and expressing and unfolding through and as all of its creation. Everything is that one divine presence, that one limitless substance expressed in its own way. That everything includes me and each person who is within the sound of my voice. Each one, an individualized expression of that one infinite love, that divine energy, that infinite intelligence, that limitless love expressed in a unique and wonderful and personal way. And I know that as that creative power continues to share itself, to evolve and unfold itself, it does so in a manner that brings more love, more prosperity, more harmony and balance, more health and vitality, more comfort and love, more sweetness and richness, creativity and goodness into our lives. And the good news is there is nothing that stands in the way of this. The experience of an eclipse crossing our path can be one of fear, or can be one of wonder and insight and invitation. So I choose to be aware of love unfolding, new possibilities in every circumstance. The ones that are obviously good, we allow them to express as good. And the ones that seem so challenging that we would normally immediately and instinctively define as bad or challenging or difficult or wrong or undesirable, there's a gift in there as well. Because when the darkness comes, we get to see the light return. A transformation that is not possible without the darkness. And with this in mind, I know that love is unfolding, that goodness is at hand for each of us in our own way. And I'm grateful for the good that's coming about. I'm grateful for the willingness of each one who is listening now to be able to let go of attachment to thinking that we already know how this is going to go, that we already know how this is coming out, to open to something new and wonderful. I'm grateful for that willingness, and I'm grateful for the awareness of the love. And I am grateful to be able to speak this word and release it into that creative law that creates everything. And to know without question, doubt, hesitation, or delay that this good is happening now. And so I let it be. I speak this word and I let it be. And so it is.
The Practical Prayer Podcast with Reverend Bill Marchiony and Carol Lawrence is a production of BeTheLight.com.
be-the-light.com.
Where you can find more information about practical prayer for real results.
Our theme is by Music of Wisdom. You can learn about the spiritual community of New Thought Philadelphia with daily guided meditations,
Weekly celebrations of spirit,
and Reverend Bill's classes in practical spirituality
at newthoughtphilly.org.
The Practical Prayer Podcast, episode number 148 on Eclipse Day.
148.
148.
Just sounds like a lot. Yeah. So, you know that number? That number means a lot to me in a lot of ways. That means I
148
came up with
does?
100. Well, no, each week.
Okay.
Each week the number, yeah, because that means that you gave me the assignment when we started that I'll come up with a subject And I have come up with, let's see, 148. Well, if we factor in the times that I probably called in sick, something like that, which hasn't been a lot.
It's only been 2 or 3, yeah.
Yeah, so maybe I came up with 140 subjects to talk about.
Yeah, I think it's even
And
more than that. And when I was first thinking about doing this podcast, I could think of maybe a dozen. So you subtract out my 12, and even though I never did them, you're like 130, 140 ahead.
well, you can just look, it depends on how you look at things. You could say that, look at how much you were able to just do, because we don't meet earlier in the week and go through it for an hour or two and say, what do you think? And we never get like on the same page in advance. We just show up and, you pull it off. Now we so there's a lot of ways to look at that, right? You could say, well, you pull it off. You're brilliant. I am, I'm quite wooey. So I think that Spirit knows ahead of time and gets in there and shuffles it up and makes sure we make sense, because Spirit knows that the one thing I hate is public embarrassment. So I know Spirit will get in here and stir it up in my head so I don't say nothing dumb.
Okay. Well, amen to that. Amen to that. And there's one of my talents seems to be responding in the moment to these things. And I was noticing that. I mean, we've been talking about that. I do these meditations on Zoom twice a day. There's 12 times a week. And the group gets together on Zoom and kind of comes up with a topic, and then we do a meditation on that. And I do a meditation on that. And it turns out that's something that's just easy for me. And we've started doing them on Insight Timer on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings. And people are astounded that we'll start a conversation and I'll be able to do a 5-minute meditation based on something I had no idea about before. And the same thing with the Practical Prayer Podcast is you tell me what the subject is right before we start, sometimes while we start, depending on if we forget to talk ahead of time. And we talk about it, and it works. And that either means that I am wonderful and completely gifted at responding in the moment, or I'm horrible at preparing. I refuse to do my homework, and I figure out how to ad-lib my way through it. And I'll go with the first one, but it's possible it's the second one.
Well, it works. Whichever
It
way
works.
it is, it works.
We had a film screening yesterday. It's a film called Angels and Saints, Eros and Awe, and it's about the intersection between religion and sexuality. And it was at our Sunday morning venue, which is the Falzer Club in East Falls in Philadelphia. And we invited the community to come in, and there's going to be a panel discussion with the producer of the movie and the director of the movie and me and another minister from the East Falls area. And I thought, great, I'll be on that panel. And then after the movie was over, they said, so you're moderating the panel, right? I go, okay.
Okay. Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
And not mentioning that I wasn't expecting to be moderating the panel, but between the time that they asked me to moderate the panel and the time that we started the panel, I had a couple of minutes and I figured out a few questions, and some more came to me during the thing. And afterwards, people told me it was great. And it's like, okay, I wonder what it would have been like if I'd known ahead of time. Maybe I just would have gotten nervous. I have no idea. But just like being present. And, all right, we'll make it work. And I seem to have not embarrassed you or me or others. So we'll go for that's good.
Well, the word genius comes to mind.
Oh my.
And we'll let you wrestle with that a bit.
One more thing, I just wanted to remind everybody who is interested, who is watching the recording on New Thought Media Network, that if you have a question or a comment or a prayer request that you'd like to make, you can go to the website bethelight.com, be-the-light.com, and we would be happy to take that under advisement for a future episode. In the meantime, thank you so much for joining us today. And if you are anywhere in the path of the eclipse, go watch and don't look straight at it.
Please help us say thank you to our organizational sponsors, including the Hefferland Foundation, Affiliated New Thought Network, International New Thought Alliance, Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation, Center for Spiritual Living Denver, Center for Spiritual Living Midtown, New Thought Philadelphia, Planned Happiness Institute, Summit Center for Spiritual Living, One Heart Retreats, Center for Spiritual Living on the Lake, Unity Kitchener, Unity Spiritual Center Ottawa, Om Center for Spiritual Living, Satya Center, Begin Within Ministries, Center for Spiritual Living North Jersey, Unity of Savannah, and the Center for Spiritual Living Seattle, as well as all of our individual donors. Thank you for being part of the New Thought Media Network. Please like, share, and subscribe. New Thought Media Network, positively inspiring.